Hi, my name is Yurii. I'm the creator of this channel. If you love exploring history, make sure you like and subscribe. It really motivates me to create more content for you. Let's dive in.
The Fall of the Berlin Wall, November 9th, 1989. The fluorescent lights of the East Berlin office hummed, casting a cold, institutional glow across Gunter Schabowski's desk. It is 1806 on November 9th, 1989, and the air in the room feels heavy, thick with the stale smoke of 1,000 meetings. He shifts in his chair, the leather creaking softly, and glances at the crumpled note in his hand. This document, hastily passed to him by Egon Krenz just moments ago, contains details about new travel regulations, but its wording is vague, almost deliberately confusing. Schabowski, a Politburo member and press spokesman, has not had time to read it thoroughly, his mind already drifting to the evening's televised press conference. He is unaware that in just 47 minutes, a single, unscripted phrase from his lips will trigger an irreversible chain of events. For 28 years, the Berlin Wall had stood as a physical scar across the city and a brutal symbol of a divided world. Its concrete slabs, topped with barbed wire and guarded by watchtowers, defined daily life for millions in East Berlin, dictating every movement, every aspiration. From 1961 to 1989, 140 people were shot trying to cross this heavily fortified border. The youngest, Chris Gore, age 20, was killed 9 months before the wall fell, bleeding out on the inner wall while West Berliners watched helplessly through binoculars. This was the stark reality of the German Democratic Republic's border regime, a system designed to imprison its own citizens. The press conference room at the International Press Center on Mauerspechte awaited Schabowski. At 18:30, the cameras would roll, broadcasting live across East Germany and beyond. He knew the world was watching, eager for any hint of change from the rigid, aging leadership of the SED, the ruling Socialist Unity Party. What he did not know was that a journalist, Riccardo Ehrman from ANSA, the Italian news agency, held a question that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of control. At precisely 1853, Schabowski, visibly tired, began the press conference, presenting routine announcements and party communiques. The atmosphere was tense but predictable, as journalists listened to the familiar rhetoric. Then, Ehrman raised his hand, asking about the travel regulations that had been vaguely rumored. Schabowski fumbled with the note, searching for the relevant passage, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar text. He was about to read a decree intended for limited, controlled travel, but his understanding of its implementation was critically flawed. He looked up, a slight frown on his face, and announced that new regulations would allow East German citizens to apply for travel abroad without presenting prerequisites. A reporter immediately pressed for clarification. When does that come into effect? Schabowski, still consulting the poorly worded note, hesitated, then declared, "Immediately, without delay." His words, "Ab sofort, unverzüglich," echoed through the room, delivered with a shrug that conveyed a lack of personal conviction. The implication of this unprepared statement was profound, but its full weight would only become apparent in the ensuing hours. Within minutes, the news flashed across West German television screens, which were widely watched in East Berlin. The announcement, though garbled and accidental, ignited a spark of disbelief that quickly transformed into surging hope. At 19:30, as the broadcast ended, millions of East Germans began to process the impossible words they had just heard. A growing number of citizens, initially hesitant, started to move, drawn by an invisible current towards the checkpoints, their intentions still unclear even to themselves. The first significant crowds began to gather at Invalidenstrasse and Bornholmerstrasse by 2000. Families, young people, and the elderly, many still in their work clothes, walked or drove towards the wall, their numbers swelling with every passing minute. They chanted, "We want out," and "Open the wall," their voices growing louder, more insistent, creating a palpable sense of anticipation and urgency. The border guards, stationed at their posts, watched the approaching multitude with growing unease, completely without clear instructions. At Bornholmerstrasse, Hauptmann Harald Jäger, the commanding officer, found himself in an impossible situation. By 2100, thousands of East Germans were pressing against the barriers, demanding passage. Jäger, a loyal officer for 25 years, repeatedly called his superiors at Stasi headquarters for orders, but received only evasive answers and contradictory commands to do something, but don't use force. The crowd's pressure mounted, physically pushing against the gates, and the situation became increasingly explosive. Jäger knew that any misstep could lead to violence, but he had no clear path forward. As 2230 approached, the crowd at Bornholmer Strasse had grown to an estimated 20,000 people. Jäger, sweating under his uniform, watched as mothers held their children above their heads, pleading for passage, while others pounded on the metal gates. He could see the fear in his men's eyes, the uncertainty of their training failing them in this unprecedented moment. He was faced with a terrible choice: risk a bloody confrontation, or make a decision that would surely end his career and perhaps the GDR itself. The tension was unbearable, and the air crackled with unspoken dread. At 2330, Harald Jäger made his decision, without explicit authorization, under immense personal and professional pressure. He ordered the gates at Bornholmer Strasse to be opened. His men, many relieved, complied, and the barriers swung inward. This act was irreversible, a point of no return. The dam had broken. The crowd surged forward, a human tide pouring through the checkpoint, their cheers echoing into the cold November night. News of Bornholmer Strasse's opening spread like wildfire through the other checkpoints along the wall. Almost immediately, at places like Checkpoint Charlie and Invalidenstrasse, other border guards, seeing the futility of resistance and fearing similar unrest, began to open their own gates. East and West Berliners, separated for decades, rushed into each other's arms, strangers embracing in tearful reunions. The city, once bisected by an iron curtain, was suddenly, miraculously, whole again. The euphoria was immediate and overwhelming. People climbed atop the wall near the Brandenburg Gate, dancing and singing, their faces illuminated by television lights. Armed with hammers, chisels, and even bare hands, crowds from both sides began to chip away at the concrete, creating souvenir fragments and symbolic breaches. These Mauerspechte, or wall woodpeckers, worked through the night, dismantling the physical embodiment of their division. Each blow of a hammer resonated with the sound of history being rewritten. The 6 hours between Schabowski's accidental announcement at 1853 and Jäger's desperate decision at 2330 had fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape. An unprepared spokesman's misstatement, born of confusion and lack of preparation, had collided with a dedicated officer's impossible dilemma, forcing an outcome no one had anticipated. The catalysts were human error and human courage, not grand political strategy. This chain of rapid, unforeseen events led directly to the collapse of the Berlin Wall, marking the symbolic end of the Cold War in Berlin itself. As the first light of November 10, 1989 broke over Berlin, the city was transformed. The sun rose on a broken wall, its concrete body scarred by countless hammers and joyous hands. People still chipped away, even as daylight arrived, their faces smudged with dust, their eyes red from lack of sleep but bright with wonder. The structure that had dictated their lives, controlled their movements, and separated their families for 28 years, now lay in fragments. For those who had lived behind the Iron Curtain, this morning was not just about a city reunited. It was about the sudden, dizzying, terrifying prospect of freedom, a future that had seemed utterly impossible just hours before. The question now was not what would happen to the wall, but what would happen to them after decades of confinement, now that the gates were truly open.